While you were all distracted with everybody talking about Donald Trump and the strategic crypto reserve, BlackRock quietly just released a report where they said not every millionaire in America could own one Bitcoin if they even wanted to own that one Bitcoin. So today I wanted to dive into this report, but I also wanted to have a look at the retirement crisis that is facing the world. And I want to have a look at what would happen if the world tried to accumulate one Bitcoin. And I want to discuss how much Bitcoin you actually need to retire on in the future to avoid this retirement crisis that is facing many people all around the world. Before we get into how much money or fiat or dollars you might need to retire, I want to rewind and discuss everything that BlackRock has been discussing regarding their Bitcoin pivots. Because again, we are going to talk about their most recent report that dropped last week. But let's not forget, in January, BlackRock came out and they said that a 2% Bitcoin allocation is a reasonable range for any portfolio. And we do know that BlackRock has made many other very bullish predictions. And there's been some very interesting numbers leaked from BlackRock meetings previously. We covered this one for you guys where BlackRock held a closed door meetings for their clients, and a quant came out and said a 28% allocation to Bitcoin was optimal. Again, I've highlighted that quote there. And we also are going to be covering a prior report that we've talked about a couple of times before on the channel, where BlackRock actually said that an 85% allocation to Bitcoin was optimal. So we're going to get to all of that. We're going to be crunching some numbers today. We're going to be taking a little bit of a new look at the retirement crisis going on around the world today, and why BlackRock is talking about things like this in their new reports. So you can see the highlighted quote at the very bottom. If every millionaire in the US asked their financial advisor to get them one Bitcoin, there wouldn't be enough. So this has been circulating on Twitter over the past 24 hours. And again, this is something friend of the channel, British Hodl, has talked about a lot. There is going to be a race to get to one Bitcoin. Not everybody can accumulate one Bitcoin. This is obviously because Bitcoin is very rare, Bitcoin is very scarce, and this is very different to fiat. Okay, in fiat, you don't know what percentage of the global money supply you actually own. We're going to be looking at how the amount to retire has just been slowly rising year after year after year, as people are kind of stuck on this perpetual hamster wheel because the cost of living continues to increase year after year after year. We're going to get to all of that. I want to focus on BlackRock for the first little part of this live stream. So let's have a look at this brand new report. So as we can see, this literally happened last week. Why Bitcoin? A perspective from model portfolio builders. Now, this is a little bit interesting, and this is very important to note, because who is a model portfolio builder? Who is that? Well, it's the pension funds. It's the people who control the $900 trillion of money. Okay, I'm going to show you guys exactly what this looks like. The people who actually matter and who are actually going to move the markets and actually move the price of Bitcoin and make it possible for us to retire on Bitcoin, and even a smaller amount of Bitcoin than you might think. We're going to get to those numbers here shortly. But BlackRock talks to the people who control all of this money, the people who control the $100 trillion invested into the equity markets that's shown on screen. BlackRock is talking to the equity asset managers, the pension funds, the sovereign wealth funds, who control the $300 trillion of global debt that is on our screen right now. As Buck52000 in the chat says, BlackRock talks to the boomers. The boomers have all the money. So when BlackRock talks, people listen. This is very important to be aware of. So when BlackRock is openly publishing new reports every month or so now, has to make ourselves ask the question. So what's really interesting about BlackRock's most recent report is they are now including their own Bitcoin ETF, the IBIT Bitcoin ETF, in their own fund. They're model portfolios. So these are the portfolios that go to every asset manager all around the world. The 15,000 hedge funds around the world that control $5 trillion of capital, they read BlackRock's model portfolio. They say, okay, what does the $11 trillion world's largest asset manager recommend? Oh, well, Bitcoin's now a part of that. How much Bitcoin should I own? This is something BlackRock's talked about a lot. BlackRock quants since 2023 have been talking about the need for why a 28% allocation to Bitcoin has been optimal. And in prior reports, they're even calling Bitcoin a risk-off asset. Which is pretty wild just to think about how quickly things have changed. Again, BlackRock, if every millionaire in the US asked their financial advisor to get them one Bitcoin, there would not be enough Bitcoin. You can't do it. Is one Bitcoin enough to retire? Potentially. And something else we have to be aware of is if BlackRock is publicly, boy, I need a coffee, talking about things like this, what do you think is happening privately behind closed doors? I think BlackRock's clients have been very rapidly buying Bitcoin. Just an opinion, but what does the data say? Well, this right here is looking at the coins on exchanges. This is looking at the number of Bitcoin on exchanges for the past 2.5 years. In only the past 2.5 years, since May 2022, we've seen 3.3 million Bitcoin on exchanges. That's the starting balance of the period we're looking at today in May 2022. Now we're in March 2025, nearly 3 years later, we are down to 2.5 million Bitcoin on exchanges. That's 800,000 Bitcoin gone. Gonzo, disappeared. I was about to say forever, but maybe not forever. We don't know how long these Bitcoin are going to stay in the hands of long-term holders. All we do know is that Bitcoin held by long-term holders is a lot higher in this cycle than it was in prior cycles. Yes, long-term holders have sold a little bit of Bitcoin recently, but I think this is more coming from seasoned long-term Bitcoin holders. We're watching a great transition take place where BlackRock and the sovereign wealth funds and the hedge funds and the pension funds, they are now becoming the smart money who is accumulating Bitcoin. So all of this Bitcoin that is flying off the exchanges, where is it going? Who is buying all of this Bitcoin that is flying off exchanges? Well, what if I told you it was the whales? It was the high net worth individuals. It was entities like this. I love this chart. Bitcoin balances for whale addresses is absolutely soaring. There's actually a better chart I prefer to show you guys of new whales and old whales. I know I can find it. Persevere with me, guys. I know I can find it. New Bitcoin whales, not the chart I wanted. This is the chart I wanted. Have a look at this. So the purple here is showing the new Bitcoin whales. So this is when I talk about the great migration or the great transition. I think we've entered a new phase in Bitcoin, and I think BlackRock has triggered this new phase in Bitcoin. Until recently, every time Bitcoin would hit a new all-time high, what would happen? The long-term holders, the OGs, those who were mining Bitcoin in 2010, 11, 12, 13, the old school OG cypherpunks, those were the guys who moved the market. And every time Bitcoin got above a new all-time high, the OGs would sell some Bitcoin and they would saturate the market with new supply. This happens every bull run, and it's even happened this bull run as well. But what I think is happening is the Bitcoin market is now being dominated by a new player. I think BlackRock, the pension funds, the sovereign wealth funds, the nation states mining Bitcoin and buying Bitcoin, these are now going to be the new OGs. Again, they're not the OGs, but they're going to be the new dominant players who actually move the markets. So what's happening right now is, like we've seen every cycle, the old school OGs, the guys who've been in Bitcoin for 10, 15 years, they're selling some coins. They're taking some profit. We're at a new all-time high. These guys are selling a little bit of Bitcoin to retire, to upgrade their lifestyle. But who's taking those coins? Now that is these new whales here. This is the purple part of this chart. The new whales are stepping in and saying, yeah, you know what? I'm going to be buying that Bitcoin. I want a little piece of that Bitcoin. You know what? I'm going to be buying Bitcoin for 100 years. And this isn't just subjective data. This is facts. BlackRock's CEO on March 4th, investors should buy if there's a big dip. BlackRock, they're buying the dip. Again, are they buying the Bitcoin dip? I don't want to get ahead of myself. But I certainly wouldn't be surprised if BlackRock were buying the Bitcoin dip. They're an asset manager after all. And why would they continually be posting all of these really bullish reports on Bitcoin if they weren't incredibly bullish on Bitcoin? And if they weren't buying Bitcoin for the long term, or as Michael Saylor would say, for 100 years. I want to get back into this report from BlackRock here. So this is the brand new report they popped out last week. We haven't covered it yet because everybody's been distracted by Donald Trump and the crypto reserve mania that we have seen. So let me make this as big as possible for you guys so you guys can see what I'm cooking with here. This is BlackRock report. So why now? Why has BlackRock now included Bitcoin or BlackRock's IBIT Bitcoin ETF product into their model portfolio that the entire world is now going to be looking at? What we can see here, IBIT's dramatic inflows illustrate previously untapped demand for Bitcoin. Have a look at this chart. Have a look at the growth of IBIT's fund into Bitcoin. We can see two big, massive parabolic rises here. I think a lot of people thought, okay, the first month or two, January and February, yes, it broke a lot of records. Yes, the Bitcoin ETF was popular, but a lot of people thought it's unproven. This is just a speculative bubble. They didn't think we would see the continued inflows that we have seen in this chart. They just continue flowing. And again, we've seen this massive big uptick in October, November, and December 2024, leading into early 2025. BlackRock also talks a little bit about Bitcoin's volatility. Now, BlackRock is of the opinion that Bitcoin's volatility is decreasing. I'm not actually going to be going down the rabbit hole of why I think that's wrong. I'm going to save that for another video. What I will say is I want to show you what they said in the conclusion because I think it's interesting. Critics will try to say that Bitcoin has no intrinsic value. However, BlackRock says, to the contrary, in our view, the discussed embedded characteristics represent fundamentally new and attractive sources of intrinsic value, which we expect will be recognized by more people in more places over time, particularly in a debt-laden, digital-first, and increasingly AI-entrenched world. If that's not the quiet parts out loud, I don't know what is. I always like to give the live viewers a little bit of an inside scoop on things to come and things we're going to be discussing in upcoming videos. But what did BlackRock say in that final sentence there? The debt spiral, the debt issue, the debt-laden economy is going to drive new Bitcoin adoption sources. Who else has been recognizing the debt problem recently? Well. If it wasn't, one of the world's most successful investors of all time, Mr. Ray Dalio, he recently said the US debt crisis is going to have I don't even want to say that word, but a health issue within 3 years. You guys know I have to be careful with what I say here. But Dalio is saying we're going to see a major issue and potentially a debt spiral within 3 years in America. This is exactly what BlackRock is talking about. BlackRock is saying increasing amounts of debt is going to be incredibly interesting for the world, and it's going to be rapidly increasing Bitcoin adoption. So let's pay very, very close attention to what BlackRock is doing. Because it is only a matter of time before the world realizes they cannot own one Bitcoin. We're going to be taking a look at how much Bitcoin you can own and how much Bitcoin you hypothetically, theoretically need to get rich here in the next little segment of the show, because I've got some goodies lined up for you guys. But we can see this most recent news about Bitcoin being added to the model portfolio of BlackRock. It's massive news. Bloomberg's been talking about it all day. Everybody's beginning to talk about the need for why Bitcoin is such an important asset and why it is slowly but surely entering the global scene. I think this perspective is one that needs to be talked about. BlackRock essentially talking about a supply shock. We talk about supply shock a lot on the channel. We've been telling you guys for a long time. A supply shock is coming. I almost feel like, who is it? The boy who cried wolf? I've been screaming about a supply shock for so many years now. And I still think it's coming. Again, I've showed you guys the data. I've said repeatedly, the real price of Bitcoin is not found until this chart here hits zero. When there's zero Bitcoin on exchanges, that's when we find out who is swimming naked. Again, let's be very clear. There is no correlation between the short-term supply shock and the short-term price of Bitcoin. I've been gaslit by a few people who disagree with the supply shock. I've never said that just because coins on exchanges go down for the past 6 months means price goes to $1 million in the next 6 months. Never said that. What I have said is this is the chart we need to be paying attention to. Investors are scooping Bitcoin off the exchanges, and it's not long now until there won't be any Bitcoin on exchanges, and it won't be long until you will not be able to, I don't think, buy Bitcoin off exchanges. This is why I always encourage you guys, get prepared early, go and buy Bitcoin, get your friends and family members set up with hardware wallets before you need them. Again, so many people thought, oh, I'm safe. I got my Bitcoin on FTX, BlockFi, or Celsius in 2022. I'm earning some yield. I'm gonzo. I'm good. I don't need to worry about my setup. We all know what happened. Again, I always encourage you guys, buy your Bitcoin, learn about self-custody early. This is why we always encourage you guys to check out what the Bitcoin Well is doing. The Bitcoin Well is doing some amazing things. They are an exchange that says, look, I'm not taking self-custody of your Bitcoin. Not happening. They force you to learn about self-custody, which is really nice. They also have some really nice incentives there for every kind of investor. The little guy, again, if you go and buy Bitcoin on the Bitcoin Well, you do get some tokens, some wishing well tokens. And when you throw those tokens into the wishing well, you're even going to have the chance to win 1% of a Bitcoin. That's right, 0.01 Bitcoin. We are talking about how much Bitcoin you need to retire. And I do have a little bit of a special treat lined up for you guys in the next part of the show where we do look at how much Bitcoin you need to retire. And we are going to be talking about that special number, that 0.01 Bitcoin number. But again, go and check out what the Bitcoin Well is doing. Go into the draw to win 1% of a Bitcoin at the wishing well. Make sure you use the link in the description of today's show. All Night Hard has even popped the link in the live chat for you guys. And again, if you are a high net worth individual looking to buy Bitcoin over the counter, highly recommend you check out what the Bitcoin Well is doing. They've got a white glove concierge service for you guys. Once you've bought your Bitcoin, I always encourage you guys to go check out our other show partner. That, of course, is Stampseed. So many people make the pivotal mistake of writing down their Bitcoin backup words on paper. We know paper is not secure. Paper is not fireproof. Paper is not floodproof. Paper is not life-proof. It's really not. This is why I always encourage you guys to check out the titanium plates that Stampseed is making. Again, Stampseed makes it super easy, super user intuitive. Okay, have a look at the little guiding plate they have for you guys. I'm actually going to show you guys how it works. I don't think I've ever showed you, but what you can see, you can pop your little plate in here. It slides in, it slides on like a glove. Have a look at that. Slides in, and you can line up the words that you want to punch into titanium. Again, these things are the only thing you should be putting your Bitcoin 12 or 24 words onto. Highly recommend you check them out. You guys can get 15% off anything you want to buy from Stampseed with a promo code Luke15. Now let's talk a little bit more. Now that you've sorted your self-custody, hopefully, we can now start getting a little bit more bullish. Because I do want to talk a little bit more about BlackRock and some other very interesting things they've said recently. Again, let's kind of put together a little bit of a chronological timeline of what BlackRock's been saying recently. There was this video that we covered earlier in the year where the BlackRock CEO was at Davos. He not only predicted $700,000 Bitcoin, but he said the conversations I am having is changing. The sovereign wealth funds that I'm talking to, they're no longer talking about whether we should own Bitcoin. The conversation has changed. The conversation is now, should we own a 2% or a 5% allocation to Bitcoin? This is in January. Let's not forget the report that we saw in December. BlackRock says a 2% Bitcoin allocation is reasonable. I think BlackRock has been quietly leaving you guys some breadcrumbs here for many years. In 2023, from that closed door meeting we always talk about, a BlackRock quant said that a 28% Bitcoin allocation was not unreasonable. So I always encourage you guys to really watch what these guys are doing and saying. Watch what they're both doing and saying. And here's British Hodl, friend of the channel, the man who kind of started that one Bitcoin movement. He says, this is BlackRock advising its ultra high net worth individuals on Bitcoin, and Bitcoin Twitter is bearish. BlackRock's new message, get to one Bitcoin. Love it. The world won't be able to own one Bitcoin. Well, let me rephrase that. A very small percentage of the world is going to be able to own one Bitcoin. Time is running out, guys. The days that own one Bitcoin, they're rapidly shrinking. How much Bitcoin is left on exchanges? I want to show you guys the chart. We can see 2 points. Let me zoom in and put my glasses on. 2.5 million Bitcoin is on exchanges. That's it. 8 billion people on the planet. 2.5 million Bitcoin sat on exchanges. Really not much left, guys. Time to buy Bitcoin and your time to accumulate this generational wealth while it's still early is running out. Now, while we're talking about BlackRock and them now telling you, you need to buy one Bitcoin, thought today I might also answer the question, how much Bitcoin do you need to retire? This is a question everybody is talking about, and that is because there is a retirement crisis today. Everywhere around the world, we can see that people are falling behind in their ability to retire with dollars because the cost of living continues to increase. So today I want to take a look at the 9 charts that expose how much Bitcoin you need to retire, we're going to be having a look at the top 100 Bitcoin rich list. And we're going to be doing all of that after we listen to Bitcoin billionaire Michael Saylor talking about the importance of 0.1 Bitcoin and 0.01 Bitcoin. That's right, fractions of a Bitcoin. So let's play that video for you guys now. Why is buying 1 Bitcoin or 0.1 Bitcoin like buying into real estate in New York City 250 years ago? This is because Bitcoin is very rare and it's very scarce. So this is why the whole idea of retiring on Bitcoin is very interesting and very different as opposed to trying to retire with dollars. Everybody knows that trying to retire with dollars is like running on a hamster wheel, because we're going to be having a look today at how this hamster wheel continues to change. We're going to be looking at how the amounts that you have needed to retire has continually changed. We can see in 1951, you were told that you could retire with $27,000. What does $27,000 buy you today? A ham sandwich? It doesn't buy you much. It buys you a little bit more than a ham sandwich, but you could probably only get a Toyota Corolla. You probably couldn't even get a new one. And this really highlights the crisis that we're living in today. We are living in a retirement. And that's because the money we're told to store our savings in is rapidly losing its purchasing power. It has an infinite supply because there are people who can print money for free. So we can see here, 1 in 3 Americans have $0 saved for retirement today. And even those who have saved a little bit of money for retirement, have a look at the percentages here. 23% of Americans have less than $10,000 for retirement. What's $10,000 going to buy you in 20 years? Serious question. Not much. Certainly not going to be enough to retire on. This is why we're living in this world that's sadly trending in this direction. Americans are retiring later than usual and expecting to work longer than in past decades. Why? Why is that true? Well, it's because people can print money out of thin air. This is why. And today I want to kind of have a look at, okay, there's a problem. It's becoming increasingly difficult to retire. As you can see, it's becoming increasingly difficult to achieve not just an American dream, but really excel and reach the top 1%. We can see in many of these places around the world, you need an incredible amount of dollars to get in the top 1%. In Monaco, $12 million. Luxembourg, $11 million. Switzerland, $8 million. The US, where a ton of you guys are living, $5.8 million. Australia, $4.7 million. We're needing an exponentially rising amount of capital to be in that top 1%. We can also see it broken down by age brackets. I know a lot of you guys watching the channel are, in your 30s or 40s. Welcome. And you can see how much money you need. If you're between 35 and 39, you need nearly $5 million to be considered the top 1%. When we look at it from an income perspective, you guys can see if you're 30 years old, you need to be making $200,000 a year to be considered top 1%. If you're 40 years old, you need to have a net worth of $3 million and be making $320,000 to be in the top 1%. The idea of getting into the top 1% is really running away from people. especially as more and more money is printed. But let's have a look at how much you need to be in the top 1% for Bitcoin. And the top 1% of holders in Bitcoin. All of a sudden, it's very different. We can see to be in the top 1%, this is the green section of this little wealth pyramid, Bitcoin wealth pyramid. You can see you only need $109,000 to be a part of that top 1%. We can also see if we take a look over here, let's have a look at the Bitcoin wealth distribution. We can see there's really not a lot of Bitcoin out there because a lot of the whales do hold a lot of Bitcoin. And it's worth noting that this is exchanges. This isn't just wealthy individuals. But when we jump on over here to the Bitcoin rich list, this is what I really like because this kind of shows you how many people own more than one Bitcoin. So this little column here, oh, I would love to highlight it, but I can't. Oh yeah, I can. Have a look at that. All right. All right. We can see there are about 1 million wallets that hold between 0.1 and 1 Bitcoin. Think about how little people that is. It's not many people. 0.001% of the world. It's tiny. 1 million people out of 8 billion. Really kind of shows how rare and how scarce Bitcoin is and how achievable it can be to get into the top 1%. Because again, this is the question. This is the hedge. This is the opportunity that Bitcoin affords us. If Bitcoin does become the next money of the world, imagine holding 1 Bitcoin. By definition, there's going to be less than 20 million people in the entire world who can do that, who can hold 1 Bitcoin, by definition. Even investing $100,000 into Bitcoin today puts you in the top 1% today. Imagine holding that for 50 years. Imagine holding that when the other 99% of the world who haven't bought Bitcoin today realize, hang on a minute, I need to buy some Bitcoin and own some Bitcoin. This is the biggest thing people don't understand. Bitcoin's gone from $0 to $100,000 a coin with only 1% of the world buying Bitcoin. That's it. Bitcoin's adopted by less than 1% of the world. What's the price going to do when the other 99% of the world realizes they have to buy some Bitcoin? A hamburger could cost $1 million in the future. That is true. And that is because inflation is right now absolutely out of control. I'm going to show you guys my favorite chart. This is also related to why there is a retirement crisis. It's because we're living in an era of a money printing bonanza. We're living in an era where, as you can see, for the first time in 400 years, we've seen inflation take off like an absolute rocket ship. Look at how that chart was relatively stable for 250 years between the 1770s and the early 1900s. That chart actually is even more stable going back to the left of that chart. And then all of a sudden we give central bankers the ability to print money out of thin air and have a look what happens. Cost of living crisis. And naturally, when you can just print money untethered from reality, guess what that does to wealth distribution? Guess what that does to the disparity between the top 1% and the bottom 90%? I'm going to take a drink, but I'm going to let you guys have a look at that chart for yourself and come to your own conclusions. What are we looking at here? Okay, since 1970, that blue line has gone sideways, and if not gone sideways, it's gone down. That's showing you the bottom 90%, you and me, our share of global wealth is going down since 1970, since governments have been able to print money out of thin air and blow up these massive asset bubbles, these massive property bubbles, which they are invested into. What about the red line? What about the orange line? The orange line is the top 1% of earners, and have a look at their wealth skyrocket after 1970. But 52,000 in the chat pretty much nails it. QE's come in. Rich people love inflation. It inflates the price of their assets. Absolutely. This is 100% what this chart is showing us. It is showing us that the rich are incredibly benefited from this fiat system. I encourage you guys just to scroll this website. WTF happened in 1971 has some of the best charts I've seen, looking at things from a macro perspective. We can see wealth inequality. It's as wide as it was in the 1930s. The last time we lived through the unwinding of the 90-year long-term debt cycle and the 90-year fourth turning cycle. Again, every 90 years, the world reaches these really unstable levels of wealth inequality, and all of a sudden we see really crazy things happen in the world. People say, yeah, you know what? Enough is enough. This is BS. I know that the rich are stealing my wealth. I'm going to create a revolution. Every 90 years. In the 1930s, we had the Great Depression. We had the election of FDR in America. It was a socialist revolution. We had the election of Mussolini in Italy. Hitler in Germany. Every 90 years, the people say enough is enough. We need a dramatic change. We need a drastic change. 90 years before then, 1860s, Civil War in America. 90 years before then, in the 1770s, American and French revolutions. Two of the biggest revolutions in history. Happens every 90 years. Right now, if you go 90 years forward from 1930, where are we? 2020. This is why the world feels so crazy, and it is because this chart right here, wealth inequality is as extreme as it was in the 1930s. What this is measuring, I'm going to try to zoom it up, make it as big as possible so you guys can see what I've got here. We can see the bottom 90%, the red line. That's the red. You can see it's been trending down since 1980. Again, what happened in 1980? We can see the green line. It's been trending up. This is the top 0.1%. This is the uber wealthy. The top 0.1% are about to own more of the world's wealth than the bottom 90% of people combined. Does that make sense? Again, there will always be wealth inequality. Wealth inequality is not a bad thing. We're always going to have people who are smarter and work harder and create incredible businesses that should be rewarded and should have more money than me, an everyday Joe. Okay, this is a good thing. This is how capitalism works. But there are tipping points to this game, okay? And historically, when the top 0.1% own more than the bottom 90% combined, the people feel that maybe, just maybe, something is going wrong. Just trying to catch up on some comments here in the chat. There's 880 of you guys tuning in live. Welcome. To everyone tuning in on this beautiful sunny Wednesday afternoon. Couldn't agree more with Eagly's comment in the chat. Everybody is talking about XRP right now because of it being included in Trump's Truth Social post about this crypto strategic reserve. Couldn't agree more. XRP is just a scam. Simple. Let's go through a few more of these charts I've got for you guys. This is one of the ones that really concerns me, and this is one of the ones for why it is impossible to retire in fiat and in dollars. The money supply is going absolutely exponential. It's really as simple as that. Let's dive into looking at this little pie chart here. I'm going to make myself small. That's hard to do when you got a head like me. And have a look at that. I'm really interested in this, let's call it the blue sliver. These are the guys who own between 0.1 Bitcoin and 1 Bitcoin. 7%. 7%. Not many. Not many at all. And then have a look at the big green sliver. So these are the guys who own between 1 million Satoshis and 10 million Satoshis. This is between 1% of a Bitcoin. That's how much Bitcoin you can win if you go into the wishing well over here at the Bitcoin well. 1% of a Bitcoin is not chump change. It's about $1,000 today. So again, reminder, go check out what the Bitcoin well is doing. You might even be able to get a little bit of generational wealth for free. And then also make sure, another reminder, you go check out what Stampseed is doing. Once you got your hands on that generational wealth, go and back it up correctly, the way you should be backing it up. But again, what percentage of the Bitcoin network owns 1% of a Bitcoin? We can see the green sliver here. 16% of the network. So I know some people say, oh, I can't own a Bitcoin. It's too hard to own a Bitcoin. I can see that argument. It can take many years now to save to get up to 1 Bitcoin. But you can certainly buy 10% of a Bitcoin. Look, I've made many videos in the past saying that 0.1 Bitcoin could be generational wealth. I think that could be a lot of money, could be incredibly valuable in the future. Today, it's about $10,000. I genuinely believe this is where things are going to get a little bit crazy and some people are going to be dropping off the stream. But I genuinely believe, my very conservative heart of hearts, 1 Bitcoin will be worth $100 million in the future. Very conservatively. Here we go. I'll wait for the hate comments to flow in here. I do genuinely believe that. And if I actually told you what I believed, you wouldn't believe me. I actually think the price of Bitcoin is going so much higher than that in today's purchasing power. And it's purely because Bitcoin's incredibly rare. It's incredibly scarce. Again, do the maths, do the numbers. There's only 2.5 million Bitcoin on exchanges, and that number is rapidly shrinking. There's 50 million millionaires. There's 3,000 billionaires. One billionaire alone owns 500,000 coins. There's only enough Bitcoin on exchanges for another 5 billionaires to own more Bitcoin than Michael Saylor. Bitcoin's rarer than we think. Bitcoin's scarcer than we think. And I think the world is going to be absolutely FOMOing into Bitcoin in the not too distant future. And it's going to accelerate a lot quicker than most of us think. In our lifetimes, yes, Kangoo, I do believe we're going to be seeing $100 million Bitcoin in our lifetimes. If you do want to learn more about that topic, and if you do want to learn a little bit more about the specifics and the maths of how much Bitcoin you do need to retire and just how quickly I think it could happen, I might link you guys to another video I filmed on that topic. I'm going to put a link to that video somewhere around there. And with that said, thank you so much to everyone who tuned in.